In today's lecture, we will examine urban farming, what the term means, the main systems used in cities, the benefits frequently claimed for them, and the limitations that determine whether a project survives. I will begin with a definition, then compare several production systems. After that, we will consider environmental and social outcomes before finishing with planning requirements. Urban farming is sometimes used loosely to describe any food activity in a city, including shops, restaurants, and distribution centers. For research purposes, however, its central feature is food production within or close to a built-up area. Production may include vegetables, fruit, herbs, mushrooms, eggs, or fish, although local regulations often restrict livestock. Processing and selling can form part of an urban food system, but they do not make an activity urban farming unless cultivation, or animal production, also occurs. Interest in the subject has increased as cities search for ways to strengthen food access, reuse vacant space, and involve residents in neighborhood projects. A common claim is that locally grown food travels a shorter distance and therefore always has a smaller environmental footprint. Shorter journeys can reduce some transport impacts, particularly when conventional produce is moved long distances in small refrigerated vehicles. Yet distance alone is an incomplete measure. Heated greenhouses, artificial lighting, packaging, refrigeration, and inefficient delivery can outweigh the benefit of a shorter journey. Researchers therefore compare the complete system rather than assuming that local automatically means low carbon. Let us now distinguish four common forms of urban farming. The first is the community garden, where individuals or groups cultivate separate plots, or shared beds, usually outdoors and at ground level. The second is commercial cultivation on vacant land, which is managed primarily as a business rather than as a recreational space. A third approach uses roofs. Lightweight containers may be placed on existing buildings, while specially designed greenhouses can create a more controlled environment. A roof that appears flat and empty is not automatically suitable. Soil, stored water, people, and equipment add substantial weight. Before choosing crops or designing drainage, planners need a structural assessment to establish how much load the building can carry safely. Sunlight, wind exposure, safe access, waterproofing, and drainage are evaluated after the roof's basic capacity has been confirmed. The fourth form is controlled environment farming, which may occupy a warehouse, basement, or purpose-built vertical facility. Many of these farms use hydroponics, a method in which plants grow without soil. Their roots may be held in an inert material, but water containing dissolved minerals delivers what the plants require. This carefully balanced liquid is known as a nutrient solution. Sensors can monitor acidity, mineral concentration, temperature, and water flow so that conditions remain relatively stable. Hydroponic systems can recirculate water, meaning that they may use far less than open field production for the same quantity of leafy vegetables. Some facilities also stack crops vertically, increasing production per square meter of floor space. These advantages create an appealing image of efficient city agriculture, but there is an important trade-off. Plants indoors cannot rely fully on sunlight, and heating, cooling, ventilation, pumps, and LED lighting all require energy. Consequently, a controlled system may save water and land while creating greater energy demand than an outdoor farm. The result depends on crop type, climate, building design, and whether the electricity supply has a high or low carbon intensity. We can now turn from production methods to potential benefits. Community gardens are often evaluated only by the amount of food harvested, but this overlooks their wider function. Shared work can increase social contact among residents, who might otherwise have little reason to meet. Gardens may also host workshops on seed sowing, composting, cooking, and nutrition, providing practical education rather than simply recreation. These outcomes are difficult to express in kilograms, yet they may be the main reason a local authority supports a garden. Urban cultivation can also influence water management. During heavy rain, water runs rapidly from roofs and paved surfaces into drains, which may contribute to local flooding. Soil, compost, planted beds, and some green roofs can temporarily hold stormwater and release it more slowly. Captured rain may later be used for irrigation, although storage tanks must be designed to prevent contamination and mosquito breeding. Another frequently discussed effect concerns urban temperature. Dark roofs and hard surfaces absorb solar radiation, while vegetation provides shade and loses water through its leaves. At a sufficient scale, planted areas may help reduce local heat during hot weather, improving comfort around the site. This does not mean that one small garden will cool an entire city. Location, area, plant cover, and water availability determine the size of the effect. We should now consider risks, beginning with ground-level sites. Vacant land may look ideal, but its previous use can create hidden problems. Former factories, workshops, fuel stations, and heavily trafficked sites may contain metals, fuel residues, or other harmful substances. Poor fertility can often be improved with compost. Soil contamination is different, because adding nutrients does not remove a hazardous chemical. Former industrial land must therefore be tested for contamination before food is grown directly in the soil. Where risk is present, a project may use sealed raised beds with verified clean soil, or it may choose a non-food use instead. Water quality, safe composting, tool storage, and hygiene during harvesting also require clear procedures. A less visible problem is insecure land access. Some gardens are established on vacant plots through short informal agreements. Once the neighborhood becomes more valuable, the owner may decide to build on the land. Volunteers can then lose years of soil improvement, infrastructure, and community effort with little notice. Temporary access may be useful for a trial, but long-term projects need leases or other arrangements that recognize the value of their investment. Funding is also important, although a large starting grant does not guarantee continuity. Projects require plans for maintenance, water bills, replacement equipment, leadership changes, and periods when volunteer participation falls. Finally, public policy shapes what is possible. Planning rules may determine whether food can be sold, whether a greenhouse can be built, and which types of livestock are permitted. Supportive policy can provide secure sites, straightforward permits, technical advice, and links to schools or local markets. Without it, even a well-funded project may spend considerable time resolving avoidable legal and administrative barriers. Successful urban farming therefore depends on more than enthusiasm or technology. It needs an appropriate production system, evidence about environmental effects, safe land, secure access, and supportive public policy. To conclude, urban farming can contribute food, education, social contact, water management, and local cooling, but no single project delivers every benefit. Careful evaluation asks which outcome is intended, what resources it requires, and whether the system can maintain that outcome over time.
Today we will trace the history of public transport, from horse-drawn services to integrated urban networks. The purpose is not to memorize every invention date. Instead, we will examine why each system appeared, what problem it solved, and which new difficulties followed. Before industrialization, most urban journeys were made on foot. Wealthier travelers could hire a carriage, but this was a private service rather than transport available to the general public. During the 18th and 19th centuries, industrial employment drew large numbers of people into towns. As the urban population grew, homes and workplaces spread farther apart, making daily walking less practical for many residents. Physical expansion mattered, but population growth created the strongest pressure for vehicles that could carry many passengers repeatedly at an affordable price. An early response was the horse-drawn omnibus, a large road vehicle whose name suggested that it was intended for everyone. A hired coach departed when its customer requested it and traveled to that customer's destination. An omnibus, by contrast, operated along a fixed route, charged stated fares, and followed a published timetable. Services were not always punctual, and passengers might wait in uncomfortable conditions, but the timetable represented an important change. Transport was becoming a regular public system rather than a separate agreement between one traveler and one driver. The capacity of road vehicles remained limited by road quality. Wheels sank into mud, struck uneven stones, and required considerable effort from the horses pulling them. One solution was to place vehicles on metal rails, producing horse-drawn tramways. The smoother contact between wheel and rail reduced friction, allowing one horse to pull a heavier vehicle with less effort. Lower friction improved speed and capacity, although rails also restricted each vehicle to a fixed path. Cities therefore had to decide carefully where tracks would justify their installation and maintenance costs. Steam railways created a much larger geographical change. Early intercity lines mainly connected separate towns, and their central terminals were often built at the edge of densely developed districts. As commuter services expanded, workers could live farther from crowded centers while still traveling to work within a predictable period. Residential districts that grew around outer stations became suburbs. Industry and shops also appeared near some stations, but the most visible long-term change was the expansion of residential suburbs beyond the old walking city. Railways increased access, yet surface lines required wide corridors and busy level crossings. In dense city centers, acquiring land for new tracks was expensive and politically difficult. Engineers responded by placing railways above streets on elevated structures or below them in tunnels. London's first underground railway opened in 1863, but its trains were not electric. The earliest underground service used steam locomotives adapted to reduce emissions while traveling through tunnels. Smoke and hot gases still accumulated, despite ventilation shafts and periods when parts of the route ran in open cuttings. Passengers gained speed and avoided congested streets, but the underground environment could be unpleasant. The late 19th century brought electric traction to trams and urban railways. Electric motors produced no smoke at the point of use and could accelerate efficiently between closely spaced stations. Underground conditions improved significantly when systems changed from steam to electricity. Ventilation remained necessary for heat and air movement, but it no longer had to remove the exhaust of steam locomotives. Electric street trams also became common because they offered greater capacity and smoother operation than horse vehicles. However, a tram still depended on rails and electrical equipment installed along a specific route. The motor bus changed that calculation in the early 20th century. Buses required roads, fuel, depots, and maintenance, but they did not require rails to be laid along every street. Compared with trams, they offered greater route flexibility. A bus operator could extend a service into a growing district, divert around roadworks, or adjust the network without rebuilding tracks. This flexibility encouraged many cities to replace trams, although some later regretted losing the high-capacity rail corridors. Public transport then faced a powerful competitor, the private car. Rising incomes and mass vehicle production made individual car ownership possible for a much larger proportion of households. Cars offered privacy and direct travel, especially where homes, shops, and workplaces had been built at low density. Yet widespread ownership created collective problems that individual drivers could not solve. Growing traffic volumes produce serious urban congestion, slowing buses as well as private vehicles. Cities also devoted large areas to parking and widened roads, sometimes removing homes or public space in the process. Road building temporarily increased capacity, but additional car journeys often filled the new space. By the late 20th century, many authorities began reinvesting in rail, protected bus lanes, and tram systems. The aim was not simply to restore older technology. It was to combine high capacity with reliable travel times and better connections. Modern planning increasingly treats public transport as a network rather than as unrelated routes. Integration can include coordinated timetables, consistent maps, well-designed interchange stations, and passenger information covering several operators. A particularly important feature is shared ticketing, which lets a passenger use one payment system across buses, trains, or trams. Without shared ticketing, a physically convenient interchange may still require separate fares, unfamiliar rules, and additional queues. Digital payment can simplify the process, but integration is an organizational decision, not merely a new piece of technology. Operators and authorities must agree on prices, revenue distribution, information standards, and responsibility when journeys are disrupted. Another major change concerns who can use the system independently. Older vehicles often had steep steps, narrow doors, and limited space, while stations were designed almost entirely around stairs. Low-floor buses, level boarding, lifts, tactile surfaces, audible announcements, and step-free station routes improve accessibility. These features assist wheelchair users, but they also help passengers with luggage, parents with pushchairs, older adults, and people with temporary injuries. Faster services may improve convenience, yet speed alone does not make a network accessible. Accessibility requires the whole journey to work, from obtaining information and reaching a stop to boarding, interchanging, and leaving the final station. The historical pattern is therefore not a simple sequence in which one invention permanently replaces another. Horsepower gave way to mechanical power, but rail and road systems continued to coexist because they served different levels of demand. Technologies returned in modified forms. Cities that removed trams later built light rail, and railway stations became centers of integrated bus and cycle connections. To conclude, public transport developed through interaction between urban growth, engineering, energy, land use, and public policy. Its future will depend on the same question that shaped its past: how can a city move large numbers of people efficiently while keeping the network affordable, connected, and accessible.
In today's lecture, we will introduce the basic science of sleep, how sleep timing is regulated, how sleep is organized, what functions it may support, and how researchers measure it. Sleep is not simply a period when the brain switches off. It is an active biological state containing repeated patterns of brain activity, breathing, heart rate, and muscle tone. We will begin with two systems that influence when we feel sleepy. The first is the homeostatic sleep process, which can be understood as pressure that builds while a person remains awake. After a long waking period, this pressure is usually high. During sleep, it gradually declines. The second system is the circadian rhythm, an internal cycle that influences the timing of sleep and wakefulness across approximately 24 hours. Homeostatic pressure mainly reflects how long someone has been awake, whereas the circadian system helps determine when the body expects wakefulness or sleep. The two systems interact. A person may have been awake for many hours but still feel temporarily alert if the circadian signal for wakefulness is strong. The central body clock is adjusted by information from the environment. Meal timing, exercise, and social routines can contribute signals, but light is the strongest environmental cue for the human circadian system. Special cells in the eye respond to overall illumination and send timing information to the brain, even when visual detail is not the main concern. Bright light in the morning can shift the clock differently from bright light late in the evening. This is why the timing of light exposure matters, not only its intensity. Hormones and body temperature also follow daily patterns. Melatonin is often described as a sleep hormone, but that phrase can create a misleading impression. The hormone melatonin normally rises during the biological evening and signals that the body is entering its internal night. It supports timing, but it does not operate like a simple switch that forces sleep regardless of light, behavior, or environment. Cortisol follows a different pattern and commonly rises toward the biological morning, helping prepare the body for activity. Temperature changes are another part of the daily cycle. Core body temperature usually begins to fall before the main sleep period and reaches a low point later in the night. A comfortable room can support sleep, but room temperature and the body's internal temperature are not the same measurement. We can now move from sleep timing to sleep structure. Researchers divide sleep into rapid eye movement sleep, known as REM, and non-rapid eye movement sleep, abbreviated as NREM. NREM sleep is further divided into stages that range from light sleep to deeper slow-wave sleep. The deepest stage occurs during NREM sleep and is characterized by prominent slow electrical activity in the brain. It can be difficult to wake a person from this stage, especially during the earlier part of the night when deep sleep is more concentrated. REM sleep has a different pattern. Brain activity becomes more similar to waking, the eyes move rapidly, and vivid dreaming is commonly reported. Dreaming is not exclusive to REM, however, and reports from NREM awakenings can also contain mental imagery. A typical night contains several cycles through NREM and REM sleep rather than one continuous block of each type. Early cycles usually contain more deep NREM sleep, while REM periods generally become longer toward morning. This changing pattern explains why losing the first part and losing the final part of a night's sleep may affect the balance of stages differently. What functions does sleep perform? Researchers study many possibilities, but we should avoid assigning one simple purpose to each stage. One well-supported area concerns learning and memory. Attention during wakefulness is needed to take in information, but later sleep contributes to the consolidation of memory. Consolidation refers to processes that stabilize and reorganize newly acquired information after initial learning. Different kinds of learning may benefit from different features of NREM and REM sleep, and the processes can work together across a full night. It would therefore be inaccurate to say that only REM supports memory or that deep sleep has a single exclusive function. Sleep also interacts with immune activity, metabolism, emotional regulation, and the removal of some waste products from brain tissue. These areas remain active fields of research, and evidence from one age group or laboratory task may not apply equally to everyone. A striking physical feature of REM sleep concerns movement. Breathing continues and the eyes remain active, but most skeletal muscles become temporarily inactive. This reduction in muscle tone limits large body movements while vivid dream-related brain activity is occurring. Small twitches can still happen, and the muscles required for breathing are not switched off. Let us now consider factors that can modify sleep pressure and timing. During waking hours, a substance called adenosine accumulates as a result of cellular energy use and contributes to the sensation of increasing sleep pressure. Caffeine temporarily reduces that sensation by blocking receptors normally used by adenosine. It does not remove adenosine or eliminate the biological need for sleep. As caffeine is processed and its effect declines, the underlying sleep pressure can become noticeable again. The duration of caffeine's action differs among individuals and can be influenced by dose, timing, pregnancy, medication, and genetic variation. Another important influence is the regularity of the sleep schedule. Total sleep duration matters, but large changes between weekday and weekend timing can repeatedly shift the relationship between behavior and the body clock. Similar bed and waking times improve the consistency of sleep timing, making daily cues more predictable for the circadian system. Consistency does not mean that every night must be identical, and it cannot compensate for a schedule that provides insufficient sleep opportunity. It is one part of sleep organization rather than a cure for every sleep problem. Finally, how can sleep be measured? The simplest approach is a sleep diary in which a person records bedtimes, estimated sleep onset, awakenings, waking time, naps, and relevant factors such as caffeine. A diary is inexpensive and captures the person's experience, but estimates may be inaccurate because people are not continuously aware while asleep. Actigraphy adds a wearable movement sensor, usually worn for several days or weeks, to estimate periods of sleep and wakefulness. It provides objective movement data in everyday conditions, although quiet wakefulness may sometimes be classified as sleep. The most detailed laboratory method is polysomnography, which records brain activity, eye movement, muscle activity, breathing, and other physiological signals. Polysomnography can identify sleep stages and certain disorders, but it is more expensive and may involve sleeping in an unfamiliar environment. Researchers choose a method according to the question. A diary may be sufficient for studying routines, while sleep stage analysis requires physiological recording. To conclude, sleep emerges from interaction between homeostatic pressure and circadian timing, and it cycles through distinct but connected stages. Understanding those systems helps researchers interpret behavior, learning, substances such as caffeine, and the strengths and limits of different measurement methods.
In today's lecture, we will review the main forms of renewable energy and the systems required to use them reliably. We will begin by defining renewable energy, then examine solar, wind, hydropower, and geothermal sources before discussing variability, storage, electricity networks, and environmental assessment. A renewable energy resource is one that is naturally replenished on a human timescale. Sunlight arrives continuously, winds are recreated by atmospheric processes, rivers are renewed through the water cycle, and biological material can regrow. Replenish does not mean unlimited. A forest, for example, is renewable only if harvesting does not exceed regrowth and damage the system that supports it. The timescale also matters. Fossil fuels form through natural processes, but so slowly that they are treated as non-renewable for human energy planning. Renewable energy is often discussed as if it were identical to renewable electricity. Electricity is important, but renewable resources can also provide direct heat, transport fuel, and mechanical power. Solar water heating can warm a building without first generating electricity, while sustainably produced biogas may supply heat or fuel. We should therefore identify both the source and the useful form of energy delivered. Let us begin with solar energy. Solar technologies are commonly divided into photovoltaic systems and solar thermal systems. A solar thermal collector absorbs radiation as heat, which may warm water or, at a larger scale, produce steam for a generator. Photovoltaic cells work differently. Semiconductor materials convert light directly into electrical current through the photovoltaic effect. A panel contains many connected cells, while additional equipment controls voltage and converts direct current into the alternating current used by most grids. Output depends on the intensity and angle of sunlight, panel temperature, shading, orientation, and system efficiency. A cold, bright day can sometimes produce more electricity than a hotter day with similar sunlight because high panel temperatures reduce efficiency. Wind energy begins with moving air rather than sunlight striking a material. Wind turbines use blades to capture part of the air's kinetic energy and turn a rotor. The rotation drives a generator, either directly or through mechanical components that adjust speed. The blades are highly visible, but the turbine is the complete energy conversion machine, including the rotor, generator, tower, controls, and safety systems. Wind speed increases with height in many locations, which is one reason modern towers are tall. Offshore sites may offer stronger and more consistent winds, although construction and maintenance at sea are more expensive. Neither wind nor solar output is constant. Clouds alter solar generation, night removes it, and wind speed changes from hour to hour and place to place. The central challenge is variability. Output changes according to environmental conditions rather than simply following demand. Variability does not make these technologies unusable, but it changes how the wider energy system must be planned. Forecasting can predict much of the change, yet forecasts are never perfect, and unexpected differences still require a response. Hydropower has different operating characteristics. A conventional hydropower station directs moving or falling water through a turbine connected to a generator. A large dam can store water and release it when electricity is needed, so generation may be more controllable than wind or sunlight. However, dams can flood land, alter sediment movement, affect fish migration, and change downstream ecosystems. Small installations avoid some large reservoir impacts but may still affect river flow and habitat. Renewable describes the energy source, not the absence of environmental consequences. We can now examine methods for matching variable supply with demand. One method is energy storage, which captures usable energy at one time and releases it later. Batteries provide storage through chemical reactions and can respond rapidly when supply or demand changes. Their suitability depends on required duration, power, cost, materials, temperature, and the number of charging cycles. Transmission is sometimes confused with storage. Transmission moves electricity from one location to another, whereas storage shifts energy between times. Another established method is pumped hydropower. When electricity is abundant, pumps move water from a lower body of water to an upper reservoir. When demand rises, the water flows downward through turbines and generates electricity. Energy is lost during pumping and generation, but the system can store very large quantities where suitable geography and water are available. Demand management provides another form of flexibility without storing electricity directly. Some industrial processes, vehicle charging, heating, or cooling can be shifted away from periods of high demand, provided users retain the service they need. We should also consider geothermal energy. Geothermal systems obtain heat from beneath the Earth's surface. In geologically active regions, high-temperature resources may produce steam for electricity generation. In many other places, ground-source heat pumps use the relatively stable temperature near the surface to support building heating and cooling. A heat pump does not create energy from nothing. It uses electricity to move heat from one place to another. Geothermal resources can provide steady output, but drilling cost, local geology, water chemistry, and careful reservoir management affect feasibility. No single technology needs to supply every hour or every location. A varied portfolio may combine solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal energy, storage, flexible demand, and connections across regions. Because weather patterns differ across distance, low wind in one area may occur while another region has stronger production. Diversity can improve the stability of the electricity grid, although it does not remove the need for reserves, forecasting, and network investment. The grid must continuously balance supply and demand while keeping voltage and frequency within safe limits. New renewable projects may be delayed not by the generating equipment but by insufficient transmission capacity or slow connection procedures. Reducing demand can make the balancing task easier. Energy efficiency measures such as insulation, efficient motors, and improved building controls reduce the amount of energy required for the same service. Efficiency is not an energy source, but it can reduce the number and size of supply projects needed. Finally, renewable technologies must be compared using consistent environmental boundaries. A power station may produce little pollution during operation while still requiring materials, manufacturing, transport, construction, maintenance, and eventual disposal. A life cycle assessment considers impacts across these stages rather than measuring only emissions while the equipment is running. The assessment may include greenhouse gases, land occupation, water use, mineral extraction, toxicity, and recycling potential. Results depend on assumptions, such as equipment lifetime, local electricity mix, recycling rates, and the amount of energy actually produced. Life cycle analysis does not produce one universal ranking, but it exposes where impacts occur and which improvements are possible. To conclude, renewable energy depends on resources that are replenished, but reliable low-impact systems require more than installing generators. Conversion technology, storage, networks, demand, geography, and life cycle impacts must be evaluated together.
Today we will examine animal communication, how information passes between individuals, why communication evolves, and how researchers investigate its meaning. Animals exchange information through sound, movement, color, touch, vibration, and substances released into the environment. These forms may look very different, but they can be studied using the same basic framework. Communication begins when a sender produces a signal that can be detected by a receiver and influence that receiver's behavior. The sender might be a bird singing from a branch, an insect releasing a substance, or a primate making a facial expression. The receiver must possess a suitable sensory system, such as hearing, vision, smell, or sensitivity to vibration. Biologists distinguish a signal from a cue. A signal has been shaped by evolution because of its effect on receivers, while a cue provides information incidentally. For example, the sound of an animal moving through dry leaves may reveal its location to a predator, but that noise was not necessarily produced to communicate. Signals commonly relate to danger, food, reproduction, social status, identity, or the defense of resources. Consider alarm calls made when a predator approaches. A calling animal may attract attention to itself or lose time that could have been spent feeding. Nevertheless, the call can improve the survival of relatives or other group members by allowing them to hide, freeze, or scan for danger. Different calls may cause different responses. Some primates, for instance, respond differently according to whether the threat comes from the air, the ground, or a climbing predator. This does not mean that each call is identical to a human word, but it shows that receivers can extract specific information. The form of a message depends partly on the environment through which it must travel. Sound can move around obstacles and may function in darkness, although background noise can interfere with it. Visual displays can transmit detail rapidly, but usually require light and a clear line of sight. Touch works only at close range, yet it can be highly effective within nests, social groups, or pairs. Another channel is chemical communication. Pheromones are substances released by one member of a species that alter the behavior or physiology of another member of the same species. They may mark a route, announce reproductive condition, identify a colony, or trigger an alarm response. These substances can remain after the sender has left, which is useful for marking a trail, but makes rapid correction difficult. Air currents, water movement, humidity, and temperature all affect how such messages spread. We can compare this with acoustic communication by examining birdsong. A male bird may sing to attract a partner and to warn competitors away from a breeding territory. The same performance can therefore serve more than one audience and more than one purpose. Features such as pitch, rhythm, phrase order, and repetition can carry information about species, identity, location, or condition. Some song patterns are largely inherited, whereas others require learning from adults during a sensitive stage of development. When young birds copy nearby adults, populations in different areas may develop recognizable local dialects. These regional variations can persist across generations, but they can also change as birds move and new song forms spread. Researchers must avoid assuming that every difference has a separate meaning. Some variation simply identifies an individual or population. One widely discussed example of symbolic-looking communication occurs in honeybees. A worker that has found a valuable food source returns to the hive and performs a waggle dance on the comb. During the central part of the performance, the bee moves forward while vibrating its body, then circles back and repeats the pattern. The angle of the central movement relative to gravity corresponds to the direction of food relative to the sun. The duration of that movement provides information about distance, with longer movements generally indicating a more remote source. Other bees follow the performance and later search in the indicated area. Odor carried by the returning worker also helps recruits identify the kind of flower when they approach the destination. The dance should therefore be understood as one component of a system that combines movement, vibration, scent, and environmental cues. So far, our examples may suggest that animal signals always provide accurate information. In many cases, reliability is maintained because receivers stop responding to signals that repeatedly prove useless. Some signals are also physically difficult to produce unless the sender genuinely possesses the quality being advertised. A deep call, for example, may be constrained by body size and therefore provide reasonably reliable information about a competitor. However, communication systems can also contain deception. Deception occurs when misleading information benefits the sender and changes the receiver's behavior. A subordinate animal might give an alarm call when no predator is present, causing others to leave food that the caller can then obtain. If this happens too frequently, receivers may learn to ignore that individual, so misleading behavior often remains limited. Some animals also imitate another species. A harmless species may resemble the warning display of a dangerous one, or a predator may copy an attractive signal used by its prey. Interpretation becomes more difficult because a single action can have different meanings in different situations. Researchers therefore examine the context in which a signal occurs, including the sender's identity, nearby individuals, recent events, and environmental conditions. A call heard during feeding may not perform the same function as a similar call during conflict. Sequence is also important because one element can modify the meaning of the next. How do scientists test their interpretations rather than relying on impressions? Careful observation is the starting point. Researchers record which individuals produce a behavior, what occurs immediately before it, and how others respond. Observation reveals natural patterns, but several factors may change at the same time, making cause difficult to establish. A common experimental method is playback, in which a recorded call is presented through a hidden loudspeaker. Researchers can compare responses to different recordings while controlling volume, location, timing, and the identity represented by the call. For example, they may test whether an animal approaches a neighbor's song, but retreats from an unfamiliar rival's song. Visual models, controlled sense, and robotic replicas can be used in related experiments for other communication channels. Experimental controls are essential because an animal might respond to the equipment, the researcher's presence, or a general disturbance rather than the intended message. Researchers also repeat trials across many individuals so that one unusually bold or fearful animal does not determine the conclusion. To conclude, animal communication is not simply a collection of cries and displays. It is a system involving a sender, a receiver, a channel, environmental conditions, costs, benefits, and possible conflicts of interest. Understanding it requires attention to both the physical form of a message and the behavioral evidence showing what receivers actually do.